In an ideal world, every single movie released would be a work of cinematic genius, adored by fans and critics, and rake in hundreds of millions of dollars in the box office. But unfortunately, we don't live in Oz, Neverland, or any other fantasy realm you care to name. We live in a world where many movies suck, and where lots of them fall on their faces financially. 2022 has already had its fair share of flops, with the likes of The Northman, Morbius, and Lightyear all failing to some degree. And looking ahead, there are plenty of other films that seem destined to join that not-so-esteemed club. So, with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 7 upcoming movies that are definitely going to bomb. Number 7, Dark Harvest. Based on the 2006 novel by Norman Partridge, the story of Dark Harvest is set in a small Midwestern town that is terrorized by a supernatural entity every Halloween. Outside the town's church, gangs of teenage boys await their chance to face against this hellish creature, defeat it, and win their ticket out of town. Now, despite this intriguing premise, there has been, and let me just check my notes here, zero marketing for this film, which was set to be released in September 2022 before being pulled from the release schedule entirely. Now, we haven't even seen a poster or a first image from this film yet. If that doesn't scream of a studio that doesn't have faith in its project, then I don't know what does. Now, considering that MGM has just been taken over by Amazon, we wouldn't be the bit surprised if Dark Harvest just gets dropped on Amazon Prime and the theatrical release is skipped entirely. But if it does get released in cinemas, then we think that there won't be very much fanfare around it, and therefore it still won't make much money. Number 6, Gran Turismo. Now, it wouldn't be a typical summer movie season without 1 or 2 high-profile duds, and Gran Turismo definitely feels like a likely candidate for 2023. Though the decades-old franchise is one of Sony's most bankable PlayStation properties, there are no guarantees of achieving similar success with a big screen adaptation. Need for Speed, another massive racing series, was given the Hollywood treatment in 2014 and barely scraped past $200 million worldwide off the back of some savage critic reviews. Now, while we don't know the budget yet for Gran Turismo, $200 million doesn't really feel like enough to be deemed a success. Now, video game adaptations in general are hit and miss at the box office, and with Gran Turismo lacking that action-adventure appeal of something like Uncharted, it is hard to imagine that it will be able to find a big audience in such a packed summer schedule. Curiously, the film is going to be helmed by Elysium and Chappie director Neil Blomkamp. It seems like a total creative mismatch on paper, and with the quality of Blomkamp's films steadily declining since the fantastic District 9, there's little reason to expect that Gran Turismo will be a cinematic work of art either. Number 5, Devotion. After the astonishing success of Top Gun Maverick, Sony is probably feeling quite bullish about Devotion, its upcoming wartime drama centered on a pair of elite fighter pilots. Hell, Glenn Powell, one of the co-leads in Devotion, actually appeared in Maverick, giving him 2 big-budget pilot movies in the exact same year. But just because a movie has a similar premise to a big hit, that doesn't mean an automatic win. If that were true, then Aragorn would be the next Lord of the Rings, and everyone would have loved White House Down just as much as they did Olympus Has Fallen. So while Devotion will undoubtedly get an awareness bump thanks to the Maverick connection, that won't necessarily translate to financial success when it launches this November. Not only does it lack the star power of Tom Cruise and the brand awareness of Top Gun, but box office history is firmly against it. Roland Emmerich's Midway and the George Lucas-produced Red Tails, 2 similar movies that also debuted in winter, both flopped in 2019 and 2012 respectively. And as for Powell, well, he's not exactly a box office draw, so his Maverick role is almost irrelevant. Devotion will also have to contend with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever for viewers' attention, and that's a pretty daunting task considering the amount of hype surrounding that particular film. And just to make matters worse, Avatar: The Way of Water will be released just a few weeks later, which surely won't be good for Devotion. Number 4, Toto. In Hollywood's never-ending quest to make a movie about just about anything it can get its hands on, the dog from Wizard of Oz is next. Set for a February 2024 release, Toto is set to be an animated musical loosely based on the Michael Morpurgo book, The Doggone Amazing Story of the Wizard of Oz, which is basically the Wizard of Oz told from Toto's perspective. Though it'll probably be a cute enough movie, Toto has something of a Lightyear whiff about it, as in a studio thinking that anything connected to a beloved IP, such as Toy Story or The Wizard of Oz, will automatically tear up the box office. But as Lightyear proved, that isn't always the case. There's also the fact that Toto is set to be produced by Warner Animation Group, a studio that has had way more misses than hits as of late. In fact, its last unqualified smash hit was the Lego Movie way back in 2014, and with subpar box office results and mixed critical responses ever since then, Warner Animation Group's history indicates that Toto will have a tough time in theatres come 2024. Number 3. Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Based on the iconic tabletop roleplay game, Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves is set to be the beginning of a wider D&D franchise. In fact, several TV shows are already in development that are set to complement their big screen cousins. But rather than do the sensible thing and wait to see how this first thing performs before greenlighting a whole list of other projects, here we have an example of a studio getting way ahead of themselves, because there's a good chance that this budding new franchise might fall right out of the gate. For one thing, an attempt has already been made at turning Dungeons & Dragons into a blockbuster franchise, and the results? Well, they weren't great. 2000's Dungeons & Dragons was both a critical and commercial failure, and though Honor Among Thieves is clearly more of a glitzy, well-produced package, it's impossible to ignore the fact that this IP has failed on the big screen once before. Plus, this is the kind of movie that needs to hit over $300 million to be considered a success, and Swords and Sandals cinema hasn't really been a hot ticket in over a decade. Number 2. Haunted Mansion. Disney's latest attempt to turn its famous theme park attraction into a movie, 2023's Haunted Mansion, has bomb written all over it, and not in a good way. Though the 2003 Eddie Murphy version has its fans, it didn't exactly scare up the box office. With a $182 million return on a $90 million budget, if it did make a profit, it wasn't a big one. And that was 20 years ago, when these kinds of mid-tier family blockbusters were considered much safer investments than they are today. Speaking of which, Disney has spent the last 2 years training audiences to expect franchises such as these to go straight to Disney+, like Artemis Fowl, Home Sweet Home Alone, and Cheaper by the Dozen, so it's kind of hard to imagine audiences flocking to the cinemas for Haunted Mansion, which isn't as kid-friendly as something like Minions, but also doesn't attract an older audience either. If the budget was kept low on this one, then it might have stood a chance, but with a stacked cast including Owen Wilson, Jamie Lee Curtis, Danny DeVito, Jared Leto, and Rosario Dawson, not to mention all those expensive CGI ghost effects, there's no way Haunted Mansion's final gross will be anything to shout home about. Number 1. Blue Beetle. Along with the aforementioned Gran Turismo, Blue Beetle feels like another likely casualty of that packed 2023 summer movie season. We've got Fast X, Across the Spider-Verse, Transformers, The Flash, Indy 5, Mission Impossible, Oppenheimer, The Marvels, and The Meg 2, and that's not even everything. So can this incredibly obscure DC hero carve out enough real estate to make his $100 million movie a worthwhile investment for the studio? Sadly, we don't think so. At $100 million, Blue Beetle will need to make well over $200 million to turn a profit. And with the hero's C-list status and the general lack of buzz around the film, this project's already fighting an uphill battle. Also, there's the fact that it was originally intended for HBO Max release as opposed to theatrical release. And one of the recent reasons that the Batgirl movie was recently cancelled is because, according to Variety, it was designed to be watched on TV. Now, with Blue Beetle originally intended to be released on TV, it's possible that it will feel unworthy for the multiplex, and that could hurt it in the box office. The DCEU's history with mid-budget releases is also decidedly lackluster, with both Shazam and Birds of Prey not exactly lighting the box office on fire. Lesser-known characters have a tougher time over at DC because their movies lack the interconnected storytelling of the MCU, which gives every single Marvel release that must-see factor. And Blue Beetle is about as lesser known as it gets. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed any, then do let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.